got the circus, you got wrestling, foreskins, comedian, your marriage, and a certain transition that you would have had to made to that marriage to go ahead. I am fascinated by this. Can you tell me a bit more about it?
I think what you're alluding to is the conversion to Orthodox Judaism.
Max Olesker is a writer, comedian, and occasional pro wrestler.
James and Max discuss the unspoken truth about circumcision, the reality of pro wrestling, and
What's the problem with following your passion?
It's a living hell. The flip side being that it can lead to the most sort of nourishing, creative, intellectual experiences that you'll ever have.
I don't know the reason why in Islam they're pro-circumcision. What is the reason in Jewish cultures? And may I ask why that hadn't happened before?
It was only when Eliana and I had this sort of bombshell conversation about identity, the notion of stepping away from that was impossible. And so we committed to the Orthodox Jewish conversion process, which is extremely rigorous. There's a whole series of obligations.
This in front of me is a new tonic variety pack. There's 4 flavors, 12 cans on the website, over 20% off. Grab it today. Try a new flavor. Bush. Max, what's the problem with following your passion?
Absolutely everything. It's a living hell. The flip side being that it can lead to the most sort of nourishing, creative, intellectual, spiritual experiences that you'll ever have. The downside being that there is an inherent lack of strategy to the way that you live your life compared with people with sensible jobs.
Tell me more.
Well, I know a man called Luke. I think you might know him as well. I once asked him what he described his job as, and he said it was monetizing current trends. And I would describe that as the absolute antithesis of the approach that I've had to life, which is, as opposed to perceiving a gap in the market and creating something that fulfills that need, I have perceived a gap in my own life. I perceived a calling in my own existence and decided to just bring that into the universe and then just find out later whether or not there is any actual requirement for that to happen. So I've lived an eclectic and colourful and very joyful, career is not the word. It's a vocation, vibes-based existence that's incorporated performance, writing, professional wrestling, circus, school, a whole series of things, long form magazine journalism, none of which necessarily make sense on any sort of, strategic 5-year plan, but nonetheless do equate to the things that I've been passionate about at that kind of moment in my life.
It's very interesting. There's the idea online is, hey, just go out there, find what you're passionate about and follow it. Unless that's not going to pay your bills, then we actually need you to do a shit job. There's almost like a crossover in there where it's like, if we're going to pay you enough, you'll do it.
Yeah.
No passion whatsoever, but we need you to do that. Then there's the other end where people just kind of hit it in the same place. Like they might be passionate about something and it happens to pay the bills. And then it's the survivorship bias of those are the ones out there. Follow your passion. And it can lead people such as yourself. Tell me about the circus.
Well, I grew up in Portsmouth, not a famously circus school-filled city, but I grew up with artistic, sort of bohemian parents, which was something of a rarity in that town. But I was kind of encouraged to follow the things that I cared about, even if there wasn't a necessary direct route to a career or a job. And one summer as a teenager, I discovered that there was like a youth circus school that you could just sign up for. So I did. Me and my mate Rishi signed up, went to circus school, spent the next 3 summers avidly learning, the essential skills in life, plate spinning, stilt walking, low-level tightrope walking, trained with the Chinese State Circus and performed around the city.
Do they bring you in and say, okay, we're going to do some tests on you to find out which avenue you're going to go down?
What, like a sort of like signing up for the military or something, just to work out what your specialism would be. Yeah, I was a green beret plate spinner, and not a bad stilt walker. I was terrible juggler.
Do you use any of those skills today?
It's a great question, James. Sort of. I mean, my general vague thesis is that everything comes back round eventually if you live your life in this way, this slightly astrategic, slightly problematic way. So I remember in the midst of circus school, I was we had this performance in front of the local townsfolk, and they were like, "There's no one to host it. There's nobody to MC it." And I was like, "I think I can do that." And so that was technically my first ever comedy gig. I like wrote all of the links and I kind of MC'd and performed to the world, and that kind of gave me the impulse, which I then followed, and that kind of led me down a rabbit hole of things later in life into a comedy career and writing sitcoms and touring the world in various ways. So like, yes, did I wake up this morning and have a quick go in the Diablo, unicycle my way here to the podcast studio? Also, yes, strangely. So yeah, yes is across the board.
It could be like a party trick where you're just spinning plates. So what's he up to?
I did turn up at a wedding once where there were some like circus things just like lying around in the grass, like after the drinks, and was able to my delight, still whip out some Diablo skills.
So your early stage in life is almost equivalent to Yes Man, where anything that pops into your head that could be of interest,
Exactly.
you just had to pursue it.
Yeah.
So we've got the circus.
Yeah.
Talk to me about. So the Chinese state circus, was that just in the United Kingdom?
So I don't want to overstate my involvement with the Chinese state circus. It sort of added up to a couple of afternoons training with their tumblers when they were like in town,
Okay.
in ports. I didn't go on the road with the Chinese state circus, although I'm not ruling it out if they're watching. I'm available. But yeah, I think this was like second or third year of circus school, so like we all kind of felt quite advanced in our skills. We weren't, but we felt it, and they were like, "Well, actually, the Chinese State Circus are coming to Portsmouth, so we've arranged some time." And we got to hang out with these people who this was their actual life, some dragon dancers, some tumblers, some acrobats, and we got to, it was, I like to think of it as a kind of a cultural exchange. We got to demonstrate our skills and they got to demonstrate theirs, and I like to think that we both, learnt from one another in a way.
I bet it could be pretty interesting that when you spend a bit of time in that circus game, you start to notice who the big key players are or whatever. So for instance, when people start jiu-jitsu,
Yeah.
a world champion comes past, they're like, "Oh my God, such a Gracie."
Yeah.
But to the normal person, they're like, "Don't care."
Yeah.
But you, after 3 years in circus school, the Chinese come into town, you're like, "Oh my God."
100%. There was a guy who did this. I don't even know the name of the act, but it involved basically a giant piece of wood, which you would kind of basically climb up, and it would somehow like balance. Anyway, that guy was the king.
Professional wrestling.
Yeah.
So I've gone through almost the Dunning-Kruger effect of this, where when I was young,
Yeah.
loved wrestling,
Yeah.
professional wrestling, not as in, your Olympic wrestling, WWE. I'd like to think, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
38.
Okay, perfect. We would have had the same WWE,
We're talking late 90s.
D-Generation X.
Yeah. Attitude Era.
Yeah, perfect.
Rock Austin,
Triple H.
Undertaker.
Perfect. I don't think that the je ne sais quoi of the wrestling equation. So I remember nothing better. Any trouble at school, just drop someone into a DDT. Happy days.
Really?
Yeah, did one at a disco once. Didn't go down well.
I used to give him a moonsault. It was less effective, but deeply spectacular.
But there was nothing better than
Try beating a bully with a tilt-a-whirl arm drag. It rarely goes well.
Go around your friend's house. He wants to watch cricket. You want to watch football. You're like, let's settle this the only way we know how. Let's wrestle.
With a wrestling match.
So there was that kind of pinnacle of it. And the Dunning-Kruger effect for me went, this is amazing. Then I found out it was fake. And that's the moment I was disenfranchised from it.
Sure.
Now, in my 30s, I
Yeah.
look at it like this is incredible.
Yeah.
This showmanship, acting. One thing that's fascinated me, which gets me in a lot of trouble with my parents, is kayfabe.
Sure.
So
You
my
keep
mum,
kayfabe around your parents.
well, my mum
Have you
and
not
dad,
told them your shoot name?
they hate Donald Trump.
Sure.
Hate it.
Sure.
Watch a lot of BBC. I
Understand.
like to come in with a nuance.
Yep.
And sometimes try and see the other side of devil's advocate. And my mum and dad are like, "Oh, but the things he says." I said, "Do you not appreciate he's a character?" And they go, "No." I said, "Hulk Hogan, who is he when he's not wrestling?" They're like, "Hulk Hogan." I was like, who do you think Donald Trump is? He's a character, right? And he's portraying his character, whether he's in WWE getting Stone Cold stunned,
Getting stunned?
or whether he's in the White House winding up journalists. I was like, this guy's a character.
Sure.
And I was kind of trying to bring them around a little bit with it. But then the arc of it now, where I look at the moves, the lives they have to lead, the personas, all of this that they don't just carry in SmackDown.
Yeah.
They have to be that all the time.
Yeah.
So tell me about your time in wrestling, the toll it had. Why did you not continue with it?
Well, I could talk for days about pro wrestling, which was again a completely surreal kind of rabbit hole to fall down. And as with most of the things in my life, I kind of probably tumbled further down it than most people would have. Like, I think probably your involvement with wrestling was like maybe the correct amount. Like, enjoy it as a teenager, maybe move on with your life, forget about it, come back round. Yeah, it is impressive. These guys are incredible. It is like a traveling circus. One connects to the other. I was doing those things quite at similar times. Again, Portsmouth, this kind of strange, bountiful place, happened to have at one point briefly Europe's finest professional wrestling school, and this it's actually how I met my friend Luke. Who wrestled by the name of LT Hilfiger at the time. And it was a place called the FWA Academy. And again, by chance, it kind of intersected with that sort of moment where you're a kind of hormone-powered teenager and you've got all this energy. And, lots of people would be playing football or forming a band or something. I was watching wrestling, DDTing, moonsaulting, maybe a hurricane runner or two in the playground, but had the opportunity to kind of take that to the next level. Went along to this wrestling school, I was too young, but I kind of pestered my way onto the course, started it. And it was transformative. It meant that, what for most people is them, leaping off their sofa until they get told off by their parents. It became a thing. It became part of my life. I started wrestling professionally, started wrestling around the UK, toured Europe a little bit. And I absolutely loved it. And I sort of reached a point where it was a bit of a crossroads where a fraction of my friends were doing this as a job, kind of full time. Lots of people had tried or sort of tried and not quite made it and become disillusioned, broken down. As you know, and as people tend to know now, despite the fact that wrestling has all sorts of predetermined elements, it's unbelievably physical, it's unbelievably draining and grueling. And at the time in the UK, you got paid less than peanuts. You were doing it all for the love of the game. You were squeezing into a tiny Skoda and driving 12 hours to Carlisle on a Saturday night to wrestle, and then setting up the ring and driving back and eat, fueled on 12 Red Bulls and half a Ginster's pasty. But you it was a passion thing. And there was this kind of distant potential wild dream of going off to, the WWE or to Japan maybe, or possibly Mexico or something, and kind of making the big bucks. But it was pretty kind of far off. And then I once went to an event called the Wrestlers Reunion, which was run by this retired wrestler called Wayne Bridges, at his pub in Essex. And I went there, and I guess I would have been sort of 16 or 17. And I was surrounded by the haunting spectacle of lots of retired professional wrestlers or just older professional wrestlers, some of whom I thought looked unimaginably washed out and broken down and horrifying, and many of whom were probably about 5 years younger than I am now. But at the time, this was quite startling to see that there's more than just the spandex and the theme tune and running out there and the 12-minute match that you get to have and kind of capture the audience's emotions in the palm of your hand. There's also this series of slightly devastating repercussions that can kind of shape the rest of your life. So there was the fact that I was unbelievable. I'm still pretty slight. I was tiny. I was undersized teenager. I'd have had to put on vast amounts of, muscle and size, in order to even be in contention, even in the UK, let alone, America, where everyone's, 7 times the size. The fact that it would be incredibly difficult to kind of compete on that sort of level, and the fact that in the UK it was kind of impossible to forge anything like a reasonable living. But those are the kind of strategic, sensible ideas which were in the back of my head. The main thing was that I had another passion that I was interested in, which was comedy, writing, performing, theatre. And that was an impulse that I'd had before even wrestling came along. That had been as long as I'd been alive. I was kind of captivated by telling stories and performing, and so I wanted to do that. So I ended up going off to, I spent a year, it's a classic gap year story, spend a year wrestling as much as you can and performing in a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, touring around Eastern Europe, to try and work out the thing that you want to do with your life. And to me, that was instructive, because I ended up falling in somehow with this touring production that was part of Portsmouth University. I think I managed to join their student drama society despite not being a student, because they just hadn't actually made a rule that said you had to be a student to join the society. And I asked if I could, and they would check the kind of document, Yeah, seemingly so. So joined that, kind of fell in with a group of people, enjoyed. I liked being with people who had one interest in performing, but also had a sort of series of their own passions and interests, which at a drama school you don't get, because at drama school everyone's there for exactly the same reason. They're there to get kind of broken down into dust and then built back up as a kind of vessel for the text or whatever. Whereas I like the fact that at university there were loads of people studying all sorts of stuff, but they also had this kind of collegiate shared experience. So based on that very scant research, I decided I'd go to university, studied the highly respected joint honours degree of drama and creative writing for no reason other than those are the things that I specifically wanted to do with my life, and was like baffled when on the first week I like sat down with people and they didn't have any interest in like pursuing a life in either of those fields. And they were just like, yeah, I just thought I'd do it. A degree is a degree, isn't it? And I was like, well, just get a real degree, man. Like do something that will actually, if you're not compelled to do this, why would you do this for no reason?
So it's super interesting you say that. The one thing that I can't get out of my head when I see amateur wrestling is the crowds.
Mm-hmm.
So you go to Carlisle, there's probably 64 people, and
You were at the show.
64. But I then see the footage, and I see the people in the crowd, and I'm thinking, cool, this is an interesting captive audience that
Yeah.
you have. But then again, through that kind of bell curve, I remember when I realized wrestling was fake, I thought, fucking idiots.
Yeah.
It's not even real. But then people can go to the theatre to watch Cats.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's not real. Nothing performative in the theatre is real. I was like, at least I'm getting to see someone put through a fucking table.
Yeah.
Hell in a cell. Then there would be like some kind of love story intertwined with it. And I failed to realize that wrestling is actually just a performative drama
Yeah.
play.
It's a gorgeous, never-ending soap opera. It's a battle of good versus evil, and it's kind of evolved. I think when I started in that sort of late '90s, it was kind of going through a sort of growing pains thing, because historically it had been this closed shop thing and it had been presented as real. It kind of, due to its sort of strange murky evolution, it was presented as a real sport. And so there was this time in the like 80s, even into the 90s, some of the old boys were still going, and they were the ones who'd always claimed it was absolutely legit, and the heels and the baby faces would never travel together. The good guys and the bad guys couldn't ride in the same cars or even be seen in the same restaurants, whatever. And if a journalist, made a light-hearted jibe about, how real is it? Then, Big Daddy would, break their ribs or choke them out or something to kind of protect the business. And that was at the time deemed to be protecting the business, as opposed to making it look like a kind of carny sideshow run by a load of low-rent psychopaths. But as time went by, and I think the advent of like social media and the internet sort of helped with that, because suddenly everyone becomes more accessible, and wrestling has always been these kind of larger than life traveling attractions, and wrestling had to have a reckoning with how you like engage with this new technology, whereby you log on and your favorite celebrities has taken a photo of their breakfast and is like kind of talking directly to them, and they ultimately have kind of gone through the looking glass. Now everyone knows exactly how predetermined and how not predetermined it is, and that's way more interesting.
I like how it was done in real time, where let's say that you're going to do Shakespeare or Hamlet as a play, and you're going to tour around. Can't really change how that play goes.
Yeah.
Whereas with the wrestling thing that I find fascinating looking at it now is they can try something on one Saturday,
Yeah.
go, our views are up 30% from this drama. How can we make this feud and drama become ever growing? Or how can we get more attention to it? How can we do this? It's almost in some respects something that they can change week on week. And this now has been kind of copied in social media. You look at KSI Logan Paul having a boxing fight. You look at Misfits. You look at all these things. What people are doing is they're using social media to build this hype. And there's actually a lot of things that we can learn from wrestling. Even our mate Luke, we would see someone on social media and some people go, oh, why are you being unkind to that person? And you're like, well, this is either beef in rappers or it's a feud between the heel and the babyface or whatever it is. And it makes people tribal. It makes people be team one side, team the other side. You can then create conflict, and that's what people want to watch. And whether it is the circus, whether it is the wrestling, or whether it's comedy, the strange thing is you're just looking at a captive audience that just want to be taken out of their life for an hour and just to be immersed in something else, whether it's jokes, whether it's watching someone get put through a table, or whether it's someone spinning plates.
Completely.
It's kind of now what we're doing in social media. It's what we're doing right now with this podcast is, how can we detract people, whether they're on their drive into work? Can we take them into another flow state where they can just enjoy a medium of something else. So I suppose that's always been the backbone. You might not have realized it at the time, but it was performative. It was a means of wanting to help people find that distraction and not finding it in EastEnders or, something else that would have been on TV, which again, for me growing up, seeing those UK sitcom TV shows that you talk about, it's like, this is boring.
Yeah.
Talk to me about getting into comedy.
Well, it's interesting that you kind of pulled out the parallels between wrestling and comedy, because that became a huge kind of part of my career and kind of still is. But I went off to university, drama and creative writing, great times, Royal Holloway University, which advertises itself as being in London, just isn't.
Egham, is it?
No, it's near like Windsor. It's sort of, I think probably it's like legally in the outer periphery of like whatever the ancient medieval like greater outer extreme
I'm pretty sure it's like
London is.
Virginia Water, Windsor, Egham. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's just there, yeah.
Zone 73 of London. But because I wasn't from London and you just get a brochure of like universities of London, I was like, that one. And I went there on an open day and it was a sunny day and there was this like Hogwarts castle and this kind of gorgeous grounds. I was like, amazing. London's, greener than I thought it was. Yeah, turned up and in my like kind of freshers week went to an audition for a student show, bumped into a guy in the audition. We started talking about a shared love of comedy. And by the end of the audition, we'd agreed that we would write like a comedy radio show together. And that was Ivan, who became my comedy double act partner. We kind of almost immediately somewhat derailed caring about our degrees in order to focus on the crucial act of making double act sketch comedy, which wasn't trendy then, let alone now. And the direction of travel has not been positive, but it was what we loved. We had these things that we enjoyed, and we kind of forged our own. Like, we didn't go to university that had, like Oxford or Cambridge, had these rich comedy traditions and these comedy societies. There was absolutely nothing, which was both a kind of blessing and a curse, because there was we just got to make it all up ourselves. We discovered the Edinburgh Fringe that year and discovered that there was this kind of permeable universe where you could kind of talk your way onto the same gigs as the comedians that you might watch on TV were. And so we kind of devoted most of our time to writing and creating, sort of self-producing these mad comedy shows, and that became a kind of the combination of that kind of campus bubble where you think anything's possible, and then going to Edinburgh where everything does kind of seem possible, made comedy feel like a viable thing that it was sort of possible to pursue. And we got super lucky. Like, we didn't have any money, and Edinburgh's, it's disastrously overexpensive now. It was even then. We managed to we got given a grant, a life-changing grant for 10 grand from a bizarre like quadrant of the university that gave out like massive grants to like scientists. They'd like £250,000 for like a drill or like something. And this brilliant woman called Lydia Daniels, who is a sort of a chain smoking fabulous, that she's like, right, we've got 10 grand left. The scientists won't want it, boys, but do you reckon you'll do something with it? And I remember Ivan and I like holding each other's hand underneath the table, trying to like stay cool. I'm like, yeah, we might be able to probably do something with like 10 grand. And that genuinely changed the trajectory of our lives, because we wouldn't have been able to fund. I was like, we were going back to our old schools and doing a talk for £100 or something. Like, we're diligently chipping away, and we raised about £600, very much, off the amount that we needed. But that kind of, kickstarted our comedy career, and then the wrestling fairly swiftly like came back around and joined it. I'd put on a wrestling show at my student union, and it was the first time that, because it was just attended by like local posh Surrey students and whoever else was at the university. It was the first time I put on a wrestling show for a non-wrestling audience. And I'd always personally had the theory that everyone is a wrestling fan if they get it presented to them well, if they get to see it live, if the story's right, if it's pitched at the right level for them, it's one of the great performance art forms. You get a story, you get someone to root for, you get to be involved, and it went absolutely nuts. People loved it, and it like reinforced that belief and inspired me to kind of pursue that. And I did that a couple more times at university, and then when Ivan and I were starving like graduates, and I was working as a promo guy, handing out, dubious energy drinks.
Talking of dubious,
but we were trying to work out what to do with our, how to make this work. I'd said, like, we had this. You remember the comedy show? You remember the wrestling show that we did? and the comedians that we're now working with, I swear that if we could combine those two things, it's the best of both worlds. Because as you pointed out, like, wrestling reacts to what the crowd does. A wrestling show, a wrestling match will change on the fly based on how the audience reacts. There's the famous, probably slightly apocryphal because Hogan tells the story, but the story of Hogan versus The Rock, and how Hogan was the bad guy and The Rock was the good guy. But when they got into the ring in that moment, the audience at WrestleMania saw Hulk Hogan in the main event and thought, "Do you know what? We've got to cheer him one more time." And Hogan was like, "You want me to fix this for you, brother?" And they changed it on the fly, and it all, this old, and that created a moment. And had they just stuck to the pre-planned thing, it wouldn't have worked. But that kind of social contract between the audience and the performers is incredible, and it's not quite unique to wrestling, because stand-up comedy has it as well. Live comedy will change. Unlike Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet are very unlikely to live if the crowd are just really behind them. They're in all likelihood they are fucked regardless. However, wrestling and comedy change based on the live energy in the room. And I suppose if you create a very obscure Venn diagram, and my career is nothing if not a series of very obscure Venn diagrams, but it was some comedy and some wrestling, and I'd had the luck and the privilege to experience performing in both of those mediums, and knew what it felt like, and knew what you could do with that sort of toolkit, and the way that an audience could react. And so we brought those two things together, did it at the Edinburgh Festival, and I mean, it was the most chaotic experience of my life up till that point, but it won the Edinburgh Comedy Award, and it created this show which we've kind of taken gradually and grown it in various places. We took it to the Melbourne Comedy Festival. We took it to London as part of Just for Laughs, when Just for Laughs came to London. And last year we did it at the Hammersmith Apollo. And it's kind of grown to become this thing called Clash of the Comics, where comedians step into the ring and are transformed into professional wrestlers. And it's ludicrous and it's over the top, but it's one of the great joys of whatever it is I do.
The comedy side of things, I never realized I would dip a toe into it. I'm not calling myself a comedian, but
Same.
Our friend Luke watched some of my Facebook lives and was like, "If you can hold a crowd of 2,500 on their phone, we're going to put you in venues." We started going in.
Monetizing current trends.
That's it. Monetizing
current trends.
And then probably the first 2 years I was blasted doing it. I was smashed. I was nervous, so I did half a bottle of gin before going out.
Half a bottle of gin?
It was I didn't know what a rider was.
That's low in the comedy world.
Didn't know what a green room was. I was like, "Whose gin's that?" They're like, "It's yours." It's like, amazing. This is when I was fun. And then got out blasted, and then just, abuse someone in the crowd. Someone would laugh. Then another time you're just chucking a finger in joke somewhere.
Sure.
And,
finger someone in the crowd, they'd laugh. Yeah.
After the show.
Sure.
Then you go through this point where this was the first time that I could realize that it's not just a presentation. There is energy that you're feeling from the crowd. And I couldn't believe how much it changed where you go from Manchester to Melbourne. They laugh at different intersections.
Yeah.
The amount of time that you might want to leave before, dropping the kind of bit or the insult or the cunt, whatever it is, those things would change. And then when we'd go to different cultures, sometimes we'd come off stage, I go, "No one found that funny." Why is it that cunt in Australia goes down so well, but in the UK they're a bit timid. They're almost afraid to laugh.
Yeah.
And what's funny now is Chris Williamson, he asked me to open one of his shows. So last year, it was so amazing to not have to educate anyone. I had the easiest way into this because Kay Kurd said to me once, "No one expects you to be funny."
Sure.
So there's no pressure. Like if you drop a plate, spinning plates, smart. If you fudge a wrestling move and break someone's neck, idiot.
Yeah.
But if you have a joke that you drop that bombs, you can just go, "Oh, that didn't go well," and move on to the next one.
Yeah.
It can even be funny that it bombed.
Sure.
Whereas when we started doing the live shows, people came because maybe they resonated with the content or whatever it was. But then the more I was able to interject funny segments into it, I thought a TED Talk, you can get bored but learn a lot. Stand-up, you can watch and enjoy it, but you don't feel like it was a productive use of time.
Sure.
If we can merge the two into a live event, it can be great. So for Chris's opening, I pretty much spent the first 15 minutes convincing the audience he's autistic, using data, spectrums, and then the amount of stuff that I could go through. I had this broad width where I could go anywhere I wanted with it, and it was amazing. Annoyingly, the other day, I was jet lagged in bed at like 3 a.m, and usually I can fall asleep, but because my body wants to keep me awake, I'm just laying there pretending to be asleep. And I had so many good ideas for bits that I had to keep getting my phone out and keep writing them down.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a part of the comedy landscape that I appreciate so much. When I hear a good joke, I don't just think about the joke. I go, where did that come from? Where was that born? Where was the idea? Where was the kind of concept for it?
Yeah.
I think Rogan calls it the muse,
Sure.
where you've almost got to summon the muse
Oh,
by
yeah.
spending half an hour with a notepad or spending a certain amount of time with something.
Yeah, or some comics write on stage almost, like very very experienced stand-ups don't do anything, but they kind of go out and enter I suppose you could call it a flow state to use the kind of podcast parlance. But yeah, and then that's when it all kind of comes out and they'll just record what they're saying and kind of come back and go, oh, that was funny. You know, it all came from somewhere.
But we only see, and I think there's a bit of a misinterpretation because we only see the finished sets where they're in such a flow state. They've hit so many good shows in a row. They're like, right, my special, Austin here doing it. So you don't get to see the fuck ups and the bombs and the jokes that don't hit or whatever.
For
How
sure.
was your journey of having to like navigate that? Talk me through your creative process.
Sure. It's funny, you meant, well, a series of things resonated, but whilst I remember it, Jerry Seinfeld has a documentary where long after he's, the most wildly successful stand-up on the planet, he goes back and he's sort of been starting the Seinfeld show and so on. He goes back to build a new show from scratch and lets a documentary team kind of follow him around. And it demonstrates that there are no, even if you're Seinfeld, there are no shortcuts to, creating a comedy show. He has to go on in small, dingy cellar rooms and say jokes that don't work and die on his ass and just go back and go, no, maybe, yes. And he just, goes back and does it. And it's a sort of unvarnished look at the craft of, or his process of writing a show. And it's also funny that you mentioned different rhythms in different kind of different parts of the world, different cultures. Ivan and I did a show in which at one point there was a kind of a blind date moment between my character and an audience member. So we do these multi-character shows where in this show we played every single inhabitant of a town that was doomed, a town that was about to be destroyed, and it was the kind of the last day of the town. And there's a sort of there's like a fragile young man on his first and only blind date, and we would get an audience member and they would kind of be across from this character. And in the UK, everyone would be flushed with embarrassment, giggling. So much of the joy of the scene would come from this sort of like shy guy like across the table, like on the blind date, and then the other person couldn't quite make eye contact and was a bit like, oh god. And then Ivan would be off stage, being the voice in their head. So it'd be like, I should pay him a compliment, a creative compliment, and then I'd just be there giving them very little to pay a compliment to, and they'd have to kind of come up with something. And most of it would just be them being like, oh god. In Australia, the world's most confident women were just like, yeah, right, how's it going? Yeah, fine. They were like, there was absolutely nothing there. So we had to play the whole thing very differently, be a lot more on the front foot, a lot more kind of engaged with them because they're just a different, the stand-ups don't have the same self-effacing kind of apologetic, oh God, Englishness that for whatever reason is kind of ingrained at some level of our psyche. But yeah, I've always written comedy primarily in a double act with Ivan, my mate from university. I've never been a stand-up comedian. And I think that's quite a different pursuit, and can be quite a solitary pursuit. You kind of sit around on your own, you rattle around in your head, and then you perform often a kind of version of yourself, which becomes a bit like a mask, and then your kind of your real life and your kind of performative presence kind of merge over the years. I'm in awe of stand-ups who do it well. It's an amazing thing, but it's not my thing. I've always kind of it's been a lot more theatrical. It's been informed by my ridiculous past in theatre and performance of all sorts. So it's been part of this double act. Ivan and I have always met, paced around a room, done a load of silly voices, and like told a story that meant something to us. And when we were younger, it would often be quite like elevated and ridiculous in a kind of a fable of some kind. We did shows about like, Sherlock Holmes's final case or like some sort of Ocean's 11 style heist or that, the one with the town or whatever. And then without really trying to, in our kind of, as we approach our old age, we became more and more autobiographical, and the stories became kind of closer to life, and we started drawing on things that happened to us. It's possible we just ran out of ideas, but I think it's more that just, I don't know, like those things started to feel more meaningful. Like we did, I once, one year we were kind of writing a show about God knows what, a load of nonsense. And then it happened that Ivan was getting married that year, and I organised his stag, and Ivan had before he was a comedian, spent 2 solid years trying to make it in the band in Liverpool, and this was his big dream, and it didn't quite work out for him. Voodoo 72, art rock, post punk funk, available to download now. But that was his big dream, and we had anyway, I organised his stag. We had this big, I sort of kidnapped it. It started a day before he was expecting it. We had this big night out, big messy kind of celebration. Recovery day the next day. I had a big dinner together with all of the guys at this restaurant in Shoreditch, the Clove Club. And then at the end of the meal, the manager came and tapped Ivan on the shoulder and said, "Sorry, sir, would you follow me this way?" And led him out down the back of the restaurant through this secret passageway and directly onto a stage. And I'd reformed his teenage band. His fiancée, now wife, was in the audience with a load of our friends. He got handed the lyrics because he was always shit at remembering the lyrics, and indeed the lines to our comedy shows. And it went straight into the headline set that they like never got to play. Ivan like burst into tears immediately, and then like kind of got it together. And it was anyway. This happened in real life, and we kind of came back, I think, after the new year, and we're kind of chatting to our comedy mates about the show that we were writing about some rubbish. And they were like, "Oh, by the way, this happened." They were like, "How is that not your show? Like, surely that." And we were like, "Oh, we don't really make shows about our real lives." And they were like, No. Yes, like you do. Like that has to be it. So we kind of stumbled backwards. I've stumbled backwards into most things in my life, but in this instance, into making work that was kind of more self-referential and more related to reality, and it's kind of continued in that direction.
I think creativity for all niches is becoming more difficult in the world that we live in. I know Jerry Seinfeld as well would sit in a room for 2 hours, and he said, "I can sit in that room and it's completely acceptable if I don't come up with any material, but it's not acceptable if I don't sit there for 2 hours."
Sure.
So that kind of side of creativity is gone. I now work with a lot of businesses where they use AI a lot for ideation. It's
Yeah.
pretty terrible.
Yeah.
And they can't appreciate that sometimes half an hour off their phone with a notepad could be a 10x move there. And that sometimes having a distraction-free environment to think of stuff could be potentially better. But better yet, people don't realize how much they have in their head already. So if someone's trying to make a YouTube video and they've got a shit title, I will say to them, "Give me 33 variations of the title." They're going,
Sure.
33?
Yeah.
Fucking hell, it's a ball ache. I go, "Look, just trust me. The first 5 shit, the next 5 slightly better, 10 to 15 pretty dog shit." Then they get into a flow state where they're just, "Oh, I'm just filling these in to keep James happy."
And that's
Then
when
at 31, fuck,
yeah.
that's a really good title. There's so much to extract out the mind that's already in there. We seem to think that we need an external bot or ChatGPT 5.2, but in reality, there's something in there. You just need to hash it out. You need to bring it out. You need to work on it and create iterations of it until it's perfect.
Totally, and the deeply, it's in no way a mind blowing like into our creative kind of process. But when Ivan and I, so we eventually, you know, got quasi legitimate jobs in London. I was writing for Esquire magazine. I was on staff, but eventually, when the comedy that we were doing was kind of, it was getting to the point that if I was doing any more in the week, I would clearly get sacked. And I wanted to keep writing with them because I really enjoyed all of that, and that's remained part of my life. We basically became freelancers at the same time. Suddenly we were freelance double act narrative sketch comedians, which is a slightly terrifying thing to wake up every day and know that that's your calling. And so we basically made the one decision that was within our power, which was we will keep office hours at the very minimum. We will get up every day and we will meet and we will just write together all day from 10 to 6 and then go and do a gig if need be. But like, we need to treat it like a real job, because this is what we do. Like, because we've stopped doing our real jobs. Like we have to give ourselves the time and the space. And then if you do have that much time in your week, you're not freaking out if you don't write a joke for an hour or 4 hours or a day. Because you know that you've set a big goal for, you're writing a show that you know exactly where you need to be in a few months' time, and then you get to be kind of genuinely creative within the sort of window of space that you've given yourself.
You were writing for Esquire first time I met you, which I think might have been 2019.
I think so. Did we go to a strange hotel where Keanu Reeves was?
Yeah, so I remember walking in. There was no signage at the front of the hotel.
Yeah.
There was a man with a top hat with like a feather in it.
That was me.
And there was a different person.
Oh yeah,
could have been your.
Always embarrassing when you're wearing the same outfit as someone.
Ensemble for the evening.
Took my top hat off.
I'm pretty sure we're going into the hotel.
Yeah.
There was like people meditating or doing something in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
It was like a Danasi.
Tantric, yeah.
Yeah, it was very, very strange.
It was the Mandrake Hotel. The recently opened Mandrake Hotel is where we met with our pal Luke. Yeah, and then Keanu Reeves wandered past.
But he didn't just walk in. I've been telling people the story for ages, right? He came in his John Wick attire,
Yes.
black on black
Yeah,
suit,
yeah. It was very difficult to not immediately notice him.
and but
And he gunned someone down, didn't he?
he walked in, and I've never seen someone just walk so cool
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
Then a waitress comes over, gives her a kiss on the cheek, shakes hand with another person. I'm like, "Is this your hotel? Is this yours?" And I wasn't sure that night if I'd seen Keanu Reeves or John Wick.
Sure.
But that was just a weird night for me. I leave the hotel and I'm thinking, what just happened?
It was I mean, yeah. The fact that we both remember that night with such vivid clarity, it was an unusual time.
Probably as that story evolves, I probably told people I met him.
Yeah. Do you remember when we? Yeah, this is we're going to call this episode "The Problem with Going Out Partying with Keanu Reeves When He's Dressed as John Wick."
So one part of your life I really want to get into. You talk about parts of your life coming backwards, coming into comedy. One of the more major changes recently would be to do with your marriage.
Yes.
And I'm tiptoeing around this really, and a certain transition that you would have had to have made to that marriage to go ahead.
Yes.
Can you tell me a bit more about it?
Definitely. I think what you're alluding to is the conversion to Orthodox Judaism, which
You weren't Jewish enough.
I wasn't Jewish enough. Yes, that's a pretty good headline. I was Jewish at the very least. I've never been not Jewish. I was raised to get technical. I was raised in the Reform Jewish movement, which is a kind of liberal, has nothing to do with the Reform Party at all.
Yet.
Or ever. In fact, I doubt they'd be great stablemates. But yeah, in fact, it's now overall called the Progressive Judaism movement. Anyway, it was a liberal Jewish movement. That's how I was raised. My father's Jewish, and my mum converted via the Progressive Jewish movement. So I sort of grew up being, although it was never like at the forefront of my personality and my identity, you know, it was always there. It was my heritage. I had lots of Jewish relatives, and I went to cheder, which is sort of Jewish Sunday school. My dad taught me to read Hebrew. I had a bar mitzvah when I was a teenager, and Portsmouth is a very non-Jewish city, so
you got the circus, you got wrestling,
yeah,
but just not Judaism.
Sure.
So anyone thinking of making the move, let's just
to Portsmouth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it turns out there is a very small Jewish community Orthodox community that I've since discovered. So it's got it all. I am actually secretly on the PR payroll for the city of Portsmouth, as I'm sure you can tell.
So your original, just to go to your parents quickly.
Yeah.
So your mother, was she like a Christian before and came?
She wasn't. So my mum's background is sort of Northern Irish,
Okay.
and I suppose my grandma Nana Beatrice, who lived with us for many years, was sort of nominally probably raised Protestant, but was effectively secular, kind of non-religious.
And your dad would have been like, hey, you know, if we're to do this.
Well, my dad was culturally Jewish, but not particularly religious. But that's not particularly a contradiction in terms in lots of Jewish families. You kind of have the kind of not the trappings of Judaism, but I mean that in a good way. The festivals, the bar mitzvahs, all of these things that make you Jewish. You may not be the most devout believer or the most regular synagogue attendee, but you're not Jewish. That's still kind of part of your.
So there's a bit of separation between culture and religion in that sense.
Somewhat. Well, it's an ethno-religion, so these things kind of overlap in a sort of knotty way, but and they can exist separate from one another. They don't always, but there is this kind of spectrum. And I imagine, so my mum eventually converted via the Reformed Jewish movement. It certainly wasn't something my dad asked of her or required of her. And when I spoke to her a bit about it, she said that when I'd been born, it wasn't the midwife, it was sort of the one of the nurses in the hospital was sort of holding me and said, "Oh, what's his name?" She said, "Oh, it's Max Olesker." And the nurse went, "Oh, sounds a bit Jewish." And my mum was like, "He is a bit Jewish." And the nurse went, "Oh God," and handed me back with a sort of look of disgust. And my mum said that she realised at that point, she knew that even if I didn't have any interest in pursuing the Jewish side of my identity, it would never be something that would be totally separate from me. That would always be a part of who I was. And that she had a choice. She could either join me on that journey, be part of that or not. And she said, knowing that I could, I always knew that I would. I knew that I would be Jewish and live a Jewish life with you and your brother. I was the oldest of three. Your brothers and your father, and we would that would be something we could all have together because it was possible. So that was how it sort of my identity was formed growing up as I grew up as like the only Jewish kid in my school. So comparatively Jewish compared with the surrounding areas. But yeah, and then and one of like two Jewish people in my year at university. And again, it was never the core part of my identity. It was never the first thing I tell someone, or it was never something I thought about every moment of every day. But it was always kind of there at some level. I think my first ever feature that I wrote for Esquire magazine, long form feature, was a piece about being the UK's youngest professional wrestler at one point, and the kind of the subheading was like, what makes a nice Jewish boy from Portsmouth take off his glasses and learn to do a choke slam or something. It was always sort of there in the kind of mythology of of my existence. And then when I was in Edinburgh one year, I was at the bar after the show and got chatting to a woman, and she said, "I like the Jewish jokes in your show," and I said, "Well, that's okay. I'm allowed to make them."
I've got a pass.
Yeah. And that's how I met Eliana. And as I discovered some months later, when already hopelessly in love, it was a lot more complicated than that because Judaism traditionally passes down via the mother, it's matrilineal. And my mother converted, but not via the Orthodox tradition. My mother's conversion wasn't deemed valid according to Orthodoxy. Therefore, my Jewish status was deemed null and void. So I discovered in my mid-30s that something that had always been there, part of me, so I thought, was in fact to a vast, quadrant of Jewish society deemed to sort of not be there. So this led to all manner of issues and problems and identity crises, and also at the time to the kind of the end of our relationship, because the Orthodox Jewish conversion process is sort of famously known to be one of the most, if not the most, kind of challenging, grueling religious conversion in the world.
And you saw passion.
Yes. Yeah. I suppose so, yes. This is the problem with following your passion. You may end up meeting a beautiful woman at a bar in the Edinburgh Festival and then a year later agreeing to commit to the Orthodox Jewish conversion process.
It sounds ridiculous, but what does it mean to be Orthodox?
Well, so Orthodoxy is the sort of preservation of a pretty unbroken tradition of one of the world's, oldest monotheistic religions. So, and Orthodoxy is trying to keep those things alive in as kind of original a form as they were. So there are elements, almost all of the components of Orthodoxy can be found in like other permutations of Judaism. But you'll kind of, if you want to go back to the source, that's the Orthodox are keeping that flame alive. So to get into the specifics, the key things are things like keeping kosher and keeping Shabbat. So that's the type of food that you eat, and refraining from work on the Sabbath, which in the Jewish calendar is sundown on a Friday to sundown on a Saturday. So it's a 25-hour period that changes over the course of the year. So in winter, Shabbat comes in at sort of as early as 3 o'clock or something. And in the summer, it comes in very late. But during that time, the Orthodox will refrain from work of any sort, and that's codified in a whole series of ways, all of which are derived from the ancient biblical texts and then extrapolated to have kind of modern meanings. They've been it's an almost impossible task, but communities are able to do it. And part of that is living in community with a network of people around you who are doing those same things. It's a difficult thing to do if you're living in a kind of atomized, isolated London life on the 75th floor of a Canary Wharf tower block or something. But if you're living in a kind of residential neighborhood somewhere in North London, surrounded by families who are doing the same thing, then it's a lot more possible.
So Judaism, I believe, is the oldest religion, then Christianity, then Islam.
More or less. I think possibly like Zoroastrianism vegetarianism might kind of have a claim. But yeah, I mean, of the Abrahamic religions, yeah,
Then there's some similarities between them. And Andrew Schultz actually had a good bit about it where he said that Islam was trying to outdo the Jews. So where you would have 24 hours for the Shabbat,
yeah,
they would be like, right, Ramadan, we're doing it for a month.
yeah.
And then you might pray once a day, they'll pray 5 times a day. He has this.
And they get circumcised twice, I believe.
Oh, really?
No.
So what? What's that? What don't I know about this religion? But there's a funny story where I was living in Bondi.
Yeah.
And my friend Ferris, Muslim, turns up to my house with a bottle of wine. I go, what the fuck? Why have you got a bottle of wine? He says, oh, well, I was just walking and a Jew just called me into his house. I go, why? He goes, he needed his slow cooker turned on. And he goes in, he goes, it's a bit weird. Called into, Jewish person's house. He's like, he didn't really give him a choice. He's like, hey, come here. In you go. Come on, I need you to do this. My friend's, quite agreeable, goes in, puts the slow cooker on, gives him a bottle of red wine. He goes, no, I don't drink. And the Jewish person's like, no, you must take it. Shoos him out the house, comes back to my house, a bit unsure of what's going on. But yeah, again, he wasn't able. And again, no one would have known.
Yeah.
Similar to in Ramadan, someone
Yeah.
could, have a little sip of water, a little sneak of some Haribo. But
Yeah.
to them, it's the principle.
Of course.
It's the whole point about it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I never knew about that up until that point, until
Yeah.
the Muslim turned up with a bottle of wine.
I mean, yeah. Well, it can lead. Yeah, observing those, keeping those kind of boundaries and barriers can lead to all sorts of extraordinary situations. But also it can give you amazing amounts of kind of space and tranquility for that kind of time. So I hadn't done any of those. Well, as is often the case, things kind of exist on a spectrum. So my Jewish life had lots of Shabbat related things. We like a Friday night dinner was always a very important thing in my family. I'm sure that's a kind of key sort of cornerstone of Jewish life is the big Friday night dinner. So that was always in, but I hadn't abstained from technology and things. And because of the community that we were a part of was in the midst of, it was a sort of itinerant roving community around the south of Hampshire. The only way to get there would be to drive. Whereas the Orthodox tend, you don't get into a car, you don't drive. Lights are on a timer or a switch, or you'd have your slow cooker put on a timer unless something goes wrong, in which case you need to find James's friendly mate and ask nicely. And there are rules within rules, because it's been going on for so many thousands of years, and Judaism is a religion that's kind of built on debate. Like the way that you learn in a yeshiva, in a Jewish school of learning, is you sit opposite someone and they will kind of tell you'll read a tractate of the Talmud or something, and they will say it means this, and the other person will go why, and you'll hash it out. So disagreement is kind of highly encouraged as a means of a dialogue, as a means of kind of reaching a conclusion about something. But yeah, it was only when Eliana and I had kind of had this sort of bombshell conversation about identity and the fact that this was something that was incredibly important to her and her family. And it was difficult for her as well. We'd fallen in love. This was like, we wanted to be together, but equally she comes from a family, both of her grandfathers survived the Holocaust and have these extraordinary tales of survival, and there but for the kind of grace of God, if you will, it would have all been lost, and they fought incredibly hard to preserve these kind of unbroken traditions. And so for her, the notion of stepping away from that was impossible, even if it were to a different version of Judaism, which made it all the more tricky for her, because it was both of us trying to work out, what this meant. In the end, we after kind of going our separate ways and some kind of amicable separation and some soul searching, as illogical as it was in many ways to do the conversion, it felt like it was the only thing that made sense for me. And so we committed to the Orthodox Jewish conversion process, which is, as I said, extremely rigorous. There's a whole series of obligations. There's on top of, so there's keeping kosher and there's keeping kosher. There's, as I'm sure the pork and shellfish and things which Jewish people tend not to eat, but there are always kind of levels. So there's eating at restaurants which are certified kosher, so that's another level. There's buying products from a kosher supermarket so that you can know for a fact that every single item has been prepared in a kind of kosher environment. There's that. There was daily synagogue attendance, going up to kind of twice or thrice daily. We were separated for the entire process, so unmarried couples aren't permitted to so much as hold hands. And there was a sort of a periodic series of kind of bit like this, but scarier, if you can imagine, meetings with the High Court of Rabbis, the sort of judges.
And at any point, they could have control over the future of your.
At every point, they have
Yeah.
control over it. They are the entire. They are the sole arbiters of who gets in or who doesn't. They control the doorway that you get to kind of
And you
go
show
through.
them your CV, and they look through it.
Can I shock you, James? They weren't mad about my CV. I was very open. I didn't pretend to be, I didn't pretend to be a doctor or a lawyer or anything. I'm a writer and a comedian. I'm aware this is unusual, but I was very, very open. But yeah, there's an interrogation. These meetings with the High Court of Rabbis, living with a family. You move in to a Orthodox family's house and live with them, which I did for 8
And
months.
is that both of you or just you?
Separately.
Okay,
Because
so-
you're separate the entire time. Although Eliana did in fact move in with another family down the road, so that we could, because this was in a different neighborhood to where we were living, because it was a more kind of a more Orthodox neighborhood.
And what was your relationship to the family that you moved in with?
I mean, now I owe them my life, and they're wonderful people, but I didn't know them before.
So did the Jewish community just kind of allocate you?
So you can get allocated a person. I had heard various sort of slightly nightmarish stories about kind of little old ladies who take people in for for a bit of bonus rent money, who kind of go through your bin and check if you've been drinking non-kosher milk and then kind of inform on you or something like
Go
that.
to the rabbi and
Yeah. Which was totally terrifying. Very, very fortunately, I spoke to a friend who had gone through a friend of a friend who'd gone through this process, because as soon as you kind of start on this road, you end up seeking out anyone who has any insights at all. And he was like, if you can get the Bernsteins, then you're laughing. They are the nicest people in the world. They're the kindest people in the world. They're not like on the official list, but
it's like getting a house membership.
yes, absolutely.
You got to know someone who knows someone. And
I got the Hendon House membership, and it was staying with them. They were an extraordinary family. They had 7 children, and they'd done this on a couple of times before, and they'd done it because there is the belief in Judaism of a mitzvah, which is a good deed, doing something for the sake of that thing being good. And the matriarch, she'd sort of said, like, my husband thought I was crazy, but we'd had all this run of good fortune. We were blessed to have these 7 children. Work was going well, and someone came to us and said, I'm interested in joining the Jewish community. She was like, he came for dinner and he stayed for a year, and that was she just did this the first time. And then about 5 years later, my friend also was able to have that experience. They took him in, and I was given an introduction, met them for a coffee, and just kind of said in a slightly more somber manner kind of everything that we've just talked about, but explained my life and who I was and how I'd come to meet Eliana in this sort of strange juncture. And before the end of the coffee, she was like, yeah, great, so you live with us. And it was that kind of welcoming and that open, and Eliana's family, who she stayed with, I mean, the process that she ended up that led to her moving in with them made my one feel like a kind of strenuous series of exams, because someone had just passed on Eliana's number saying, oh, this lovely girl, her partner's converting, it'd be great if she had somewhere in the area. She just got a voice note saying, hello Eliana, hear that you're lovely, anyway, so you're welcome to move in from Thursday. My husband and I will be out, but there'll be a key under anyway, just your room will be up on the top left, all the best. Like the level of warmth and welcome and expansiveness that we experienced was absolutely mind-blowing. And needless to say, moving in with an unknown family for an unknown amount of time, because you never know how long any of it will go on for. The entire process is of an unknown duration. But it was one of the big fears that I've had, up there with the surgical finale to the whole situation.
I'm keen to get into that. The one thing that really is kind of warming listening to this is you talk about preservation of religion, but I'm also hearing like preservation of community. I think that in the West, from what I understand, we were living in much higher trust societies before, maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago. And now it seems that maybe within Judaism, there's this notion that, okay, if you're Jewish, you have the same set of beliefs as me, stay in my home.
Sure,
Whereas the only experience I probably have of that in my life is something very much more watered down, where it's, oh, you train jiu-jitsu, you must be sound. We're,
sure,
we're already mates.
sure.
So, let's say someone here working today, oh, the cameraman, he's a brown belt. Oh, what's up, bro? How's it going? Where are you training? Who gave you a brown belt? Suddenly you're already in with that person. But by
Well,
the
there's a
sound,
reason that they call it jiu-jitsu, so think of it
oh,
that.
yeah, okay. Oh, maybe I'm a bit Jewish
Maybe,
too.
maybe. I'll introduce you to the Bernsteins.
So it sounds amazing. Like you get invited into these homes, and what is the purpose of having to live with them?
Well, the purpose, I I asked the same question beforehand because it seemed wild, and Elliot also, my kind of thesis at the time was, well, hold on a minute, if I'm living in a kind of Jewish family's home, can't I just live in with Eliana's family? They're lovely, I know them, they are famously more Jewish than I am. They keep all of the Orthodox traditions alive. The theory and the thinking behind it, which I found stressful, but I can't dispute, is that in the few areas of London where you can walk out of your door and 360 experience Jewish life from every angle, it is a different feeling. It's a different kettle of gefilte fish, to use a pun that will mean nothing to anyone except for the Jewish listeners. Gefilte fish is also horrendous. Contentious. Just want to give you some some viral hot takes. But yes, it's a different feeling. As you say, there is this extraordinary close knit community in these areas of London, because so we moved there, and we moved there just in time for the Jewish festivals. There tend to be around September, October. It kind of changes because the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar, but there's a whole series of festivals, and lots of the same rules that apply to Shabbat, where your phone is off, you're not using technology. They also apply to these festivals along with Shabbat. So there'll be kind of there might be 4 days where you're totally off grid. You're just kind of with your community, or maybe going to synagogue, you're going to meals and things. And Eliana and I had just moved to Hendon, to this new world, and we were kind of, spat out into the street trying to work out where we were going. And, we'd be you don't have your phone on, you don't have any maps. You might have like drawn a thing on your hand or something, but you'd be walking down the road, and I remember like saying to Eliana, I was like, I know we were supposed to go to the Broders, but I can't remember. And just a stranger across the street was like, oh, the Broders, number 46, um, give Rav Gav my love. And it's there is this kind of there is this invisible social safety net, and this sense of kind of calm and peace and sort of support, which does all extend outwards from the fact that all of these, not only is there this social shorthand, but all of these things are kept in a similar way. So the things that led to your mate having to turn on a slow cooker, because everyone is relaxing at the same time, everyone is going for a meal at the same time, everyone is going to synagogue at the same time. It creates this kind of rhythm which kind of by which people mark out their days and months and years. And yeah, it is a different feeling to Jews have famously lived in a diaspora, been all over the world, and have been famously able to take their traditions with them. So it is a portable religion, but it does also lend itself to community. There's the notion of a minyan, which is the like a quorum of Jewish men. So if you are praying together, you need 10 people to begin. And it's who knows where that came from, but the kind of upshot of that is that downstream from that, you tend to get 10 families living within walking distance of the synagogue, and therefore each other. And so before you've even begun, you've got 9 people that you can knock on the door of if you've got a problem. You've got a whole series of people who'll become your friend, your colleagues, your associates. Maybe your daughter ends up marrying their son. It just creates this kind of densely woven fabric of society. And yeah, that was what we experienced whilst living in Hendon, which we wouldn't have experienced anywhere else. I felt very displaced at the start when I was in my mid-30s, and I was, like their idiot 8th son living in their spare room, like, writing my magazine articles and comedy shows on the ironing board as my desk. But I got to experience this amazingly kind of these amazingly high functional families. Like the particularly the Jewish mothers, they often have 7 or 10 kids. They'll work. I knew a woman who also kind of fostered sick children whilst doing all of these other things, tutoring people who are converting, cooking these sort of 70-course Friday night and Saturday afternoon feasts. It's just a kind of it's a totally different way of existing, and it was extraordinary to kind of be a part of it and to be kind of welcomed into that world.
So maybe part of it was to say, hey, like, you're going to enjoy it in this family because these are the parents of the woman you want to marry. We're going to put you in a completely different remote place where you can actually get a taste of the community, one removed from her family, and see if you actually like it or not. It's almost maybe even a way out as well, where if 2 months in you might go, oh, this isn't actually what I want to get from life. And am I right in thinking there's not as many Jewish people on the planet as people might assume? I think I saw Gad Saad on Rogan say there was only 20 or 30 million Jewish people.
Yeah.
How many are there? Do you know?
The number I had in my head was 16 million. It's not very many. It's really not very many in the UK. A couple of 100,000.
Because he asked Rogan, he goes, how many? And Rogan goes, oh, a billion. And he goes, way less. He goes, half a billion, 500 million. And Gad Saad's like, yeah, like 16, 17, or I thought 20 to
Yeah,
begin with.
I'm sure you'll be better with, as you'll have noticed, sort of numbers and figures have not really made their way into my.
But it seems like such a small amount. If you think about the Holocaust, like we were saying before, and the figures of the amount of people that were killed, let alone families disaffected.
Yeah.
When people can think of Judaism or Jewish communities, you can maybe seem like it would be one of the biggest religions in the world, because we mentioned before Judaism, Christianity, Islam, but the numbers, the almost onus of trying to conserve that culture and community must be at the forefront, because the numbers just aren't.
100%. Yeah, yeah. I think there aren't that many on the planet, and Jewish people, obviously have the memories of the Holocaust, and it stretches further back to pogroms and various things. So there are there is the desire to keep traditions alive is kind of paramount. And I think that's the case across the spectrum of religiosity, whether you go to the kind of the Haredim, which was a kind of a conservative Jewish tradition, which kind of was maybe fading away before the Holocaust, but as almost as a reaction to the fact that everything was almost extinguished, kind of came back with full force, and people kind of embraced very traditional manifestations of Judaism, all the way through to the kind of progressive liberal side, whereby people are kind of continuing traditions, albeit changing them in ways that the Orthodox wouldn't kind of go for. But there is something wonderful about having this kind of unbroken collective memory that stretches back into the past.
It's kind of weird. I'm not a very religious person, but listening to this kind of community, the fact that people know each other, know where the families are, willing to do things for other people, kind of makes me feel like we need some of that in the part of the world where people don't really care about religion. Like, I will openly admit, I know my neighbours are 2 houses to one side, 2 houses to the other. I haven't got a fucking clue who's
Sure.
on the road behind. Someone's like, oh, can you look after a stranger for a few months? Absolutely fucking not. Absolutely not. Even my mates, when they come to stay, one night's enough. So listening to that kind of stuff, sounds like the world could do with more of that community.
The communal living is, it can be intense, it can be a bit overwhelming, but there is something wonderful about it. And also, the one thing, like when I was kind of talking through, when I was sort of torturing my mates with endless lunches whilst I was like, I've fallen in love with this woman, but there's this thing, and I didn't need to do this, and then I am Jewish, but this, that. The one thing that everyone, when I discussed it with them, was like, not just interested in, but almost actively jealous was keeping Shabbat and turning off these days someone would call it a digital detox and sell it as an online program about how to reset your vagus nerve or something.
We could be selling that by the end of it.
Perfect.
I heard Ben Shapiro talk about it, and he is even like, are you an idiot? Do you not understand how amazing that would be for the world if they would just have 24 hours off devices, 1 day a week? Imagine if the whole world as a collective could say, look, we're all getting pretty fucking depressed and anxious and stressed and all that. Why don't we all just try and have Sunday off?
Yeah.
And then some people do this in the business world where I tried not to answer emails in the evening, or people expect to get an answer from emails in the evening. Yeah. Whereas if everyone was to stop working on a Sunday, no one would expect a response on a Sunday. Then people wouldn't send anything on a Sunday. And it could just be a day although it sounds nice in my head, I'd probably be the guy on Shabbat being like, fucking hell, I've got this to do.
Come on,
Gotta
mate.
wait
Come
24
on.
hours for a response.
Uh,
So yeah, it's almost one of those things where, again, I'm almost jealous of it. I could do with the pressure.
I found, listen, it was an emotional roller coaster. First and foremost, the devastating realization when you turn your phone back on that yet again Spielberg has failed to email over this particular 25-hour period, and a whole series of other life-changing calls and emails that you were certain would come in, perhaps haven't, and that maybe it is possible to actually switch off for that amount of time. But once you've sort of processed that, a whole series, like it becomes quite a deeply ingrained thing, and you notice it as the kind of as Shabbat sort of becomes earlier in the year, because from the moment you switch off, you de-stress, you become very, very hungry automatically because you know preemptively that you're about to eat one of the great meals of your life, and you become quite tired because all of the stress leaves your body. There is no work that you can do, so you can read a book, you can relax. You don't need to, whatever was there, whatever was kind of humming around the back of your psyche, all of that white noise that ordinarily you'd just be kind of firing up one more email. It becomes this non-negotiable, and you're able to kind of lean into that, and you get to sit around and have the kind of long meandering conversations with your mates and family that people just don't do in the week because there is more stuff to be done. And it's one of those things. It's like, although I'm sure it can be kind of commodified and packaged up in some sort of hustle culture way, it is the total antithesis of like LinkedIn lunatic culture of like, I do this and it makes me more productive. Like, you can't necessarily put on a graph exactly what it does, but I think it does something genuinely holistic and sort of allows you to sort of just stretch your wings and enjoy life in a different way.
I did a weekend in Melbourne without anything. So I had a bit of a Jewish moment. I was burning out, so I'm going away.
Yep.
I invited my friends, got an Airbnb,
Yep.
even kind of wrote down the instructions.
Yep.
This address, this is the code to get in, this is the box. Took a couple of mates, and I said to them not to bring any devices. They did, pricks. But for me, it was actually quite nice not to pack a laptop charger, not to pack a laptop.
Yeah.
And at the airport, my mate comes around, the Muslim, out of all of them, and he thought I was bantering, but I was doing Sudoku. So I didn't have a phone. I was I went to WH Smith's. I was like, I'll grab a little Sudoku book. Did that on the flight. It was kind of, it's only 1 hour.
Yeah.
Doing more Sudoku.
Yeah. Enjoying
it. Then I said to them, right, okay, when we go out, just can't take your phones with you. Went for dinner. Had the best conversations at dinner because there's nothing else to fucking do.
Yeah, not people just sort of.
The next day, walked around. We were just going to walk around Melbourne, no plans. We got a bit lost. Came across like a sex show convention.
Sure.
Which was interesting.
Yeah.
Went in there for a bit.
Yeah.
Got recognised. I was like, let's get out of here because otherwise people are going to go, that mouthy poo too.
Hey man, didn't I see you there last year?
Yeah. Was hanging about the gimp suits.
Yeah.
Then we went bowling at 10 a.m. Then we went to the cinema. Had no idea what was on. And we ended up watching Joker, the film.
Yeah.
And I remember just being enthralled by the trailers. I was like, this is incredible. Usually in the phone, feet up, doing a bit of Twitter, looking at this, getting back to emails. Oh, fucking hell, I've seen this edit. Shit. It was nice to just be in there and just be with friends, go for food. The only thing I experienced was returning to Sydney. As I was in an Uber back to my house, I was thinking, someone could have died 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Like, imagine if my mum or dad had died, and for 2 days, people are like, have you told James?
Yeah.
Nah, he's not answering, not responding to calls. I've got this crazy anxiety before I got back on my phone. So just before I picked my phone up on my bedroom floor that I haven't seen in 3 days, I was like, there could be some really bad news here.
Yeah.
This could be, James, your dick pics got out. Not again.
Not again. I was just at the convention.
But then absolutely nothing. Just fucking noise.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I'm going to do this all the time. And it's been about 7 years.
Of course, because, if there isn't that, if it's not built in, the impulse to do slightly more work look, one of my spicy hot takes is that I hope that our children's generation looks on our like digital intake the way that we look at people in the 70s who smoke and drunk through pregnancy. They'll be like, what, you just wake up and first thing in the morning just pour algorithmically powered advertorial poison directly into the frontal lobe of your brain and just do that at all times. Like, isn't that the worst thing ever?
A bit like when there was lead poisoning and everyone's IQ was down.
Yeah. It's like, oh, interesting. And like, yeah, did, so this is what you did with all day, and did, mental illness and things, shoot up? Yeah, of course.
Yeah, normal.
Yeah.
When you talk about kosher, and I
Yes.
think about halal, when
Yeah.
you talk about Shabbat and we talk about Ramadan, there's quite a few similarities
For
between
sure.
Islam and Judaism.
Yeah, yeah.
And to put it politically, it seems almost odd that they're the ones that are in the most conflict when they could have more things in common with each other
Sure.
than not to get into that debate. But the one thing we're going to move into now, and I'm so glad we probably spoke for an hour before talking about foreskins, right? I am fascinated by this. So I don't know the reason why in Islam they're pro circumcision. What is the reason in Jewish cultures? And may I ask why that hadn't happened before?
Of course, thank you. So it's one of the kind of fundamental parts of Judaism historically. It's the covenant between Abraham and Hashem and God. And so it's one of the most sort of key underpinnings of the Jewish religion. It's this ancient tradition, and it kind of symbolizes the contract between the Jewish people and their God. Which is why it is so kind of core to the vast majority of the Jewish people. It didn't happen to me. My parents were freewheeling, bohemian kind of sort of artists. I was their eldest son. They didn't know to what extent they would raise me with a Jewish identity or not. And as mentioned in the hospital, even in the early days of whilst they were kind of trying to work out what, where I don't think that was necessarily the first item on their agenda, but they might have, if someone had, if a pleasant doctor had said, I presume this might be something you want to do, maybe it would have happened. But because there was this rather unpleasant sort of vague, nurse.
Have it
Yes. My mum was like, well, not having them, let's get out of this hospital as quickly as we can. I don't want her overseeing
They do a
his,
botch job.
well, who knows, his care. But either way, it didn't happen when I was a young man. And then when I got to 13, when I was doing my bar mitzvah, which is the age that I think in Islam, I believe, is often when it's done. But I was given the opportunity to have it done then. The rabbis who were kind of helping me with my prepare for my bar mitzvah, you have to learn Hebrew, you have to learn this big portion that you recite, and it's a kind of big undertaking. And they're like, look, you could also, it's even in the kind of more permissive, liberal, progressive reform world, you want to get it done. And as a growing lad, the last thing in the universe, I was like, do I have an option to not get it done? They were like, well, I guess. And I was like, fine. I take that option. Like it obviously felt
Just
like,
defer it like getting wisdom teeth out.
well, I thought it wasn't, I thought it was never going to come back round. I thought that was a bullet dodged. I thought that my foreskin and I would live a long, happy, productive life together.
See, the interesting thing here is, if you'd, and this sounds really bad, the first thing I learned about Judaism was the circumcision.
Of course. Well, it's,
It's kind of like the flagship thing about it. Then I find out that most Americans and most Canadians are also circumcised.
and South Koreans.
Very interesting.
Something to do with when the American GIs came over during the war, and the style took on.
It's interesting as well. There definitely would have been a period of confusion because I was born in 1989. We saw a lot of porn.
Sure.
Right? They're going in that movement now,
Sure.
anti-porn, whatever. You're thinking, hold on, that looks a little bit different, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I find the most crazy is how tribal people are, either side.
Yeah.
When the issue is you don't really have a control unless you've experienced both, such as yourself.
Yeah.
And a good friend of mine also at 24
Yeah.
went through it. And he's now, let's say, team pro-snit,
Sure.
which I wasn't expecting. It was kind of a little bit of a shock to the system.
Did he get it done as a dare for fun? Medical reasons?
No, he it was kind of a medical reason. He kept having a repeated injury, let's say, during intercourse.
Sure.
So they were like, look, we can just take care of it. He couldn't play rugby for I think 6 to 10 weeks.
Sure.
And there was a big issue, which I'm keen to know, which you had on, about morning erections.
Sure. Yeah.
So talk me through this. So this must have been a bit of and for anyone listening, female, that maybe isn't fully aware, a foreskin's like a golf club sock, which, covers your penis.
It does indeed. It's like a roll neck jumper. It's like a snood.
Like a turtleneck.
Yeah.
So why, and actually let's backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
Why is it in Judaism that right back to Abraham, they would have looked at that and gone, nah, get rid of that?
I would say that everything related to the practicalities of historic associations between Judaism and circumcision is way beyond my pay grade. You could get in 12 rounds. They often say there's a phrase, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. You could get in a selection of rabbis and they would give you a long and learned disquisition about the origins, and then the other rabbi would disagree and they'd have a wonderful row, and you'd come out with a whole bunch of ideas. I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
And needless to say,
It didn't matter.
it didn't matter because it wasn't negotiable. It utterly terrified me. When we kind of came back together and Eliana and I had this huge conversation, I kind of agreed. I was able to agree to pursuing the Orthodox conversion. I wanted to make it as positive an experience as possible. I wanted to tie as much of it as I could to my own Jewish identity and to exploring that side of things and find as much joy and positivity as I could in all of the bits that I didn't understand, that I didn't know about. The one thing that offered nothing but a cavern of screaming terror was the prospect of getting a bit of my body surgically removed. Like, it was totally terrifying. And unlike your boy, I'd had a perfectly functioning, positive, long-term relationship with that part of my body, one of the great relationships of my life. All I knew is that if I were to agree to this, whatever happened on the other side, it would be different. And I was perfectly happy with the status quo. And the concept of any difference was completely kind of terrifying. So it was ultimately, it was like the first thing I thought about when working out if I could commit to this process. And then I was like, oh, grow up. There's so much more. It's this spiritual, it's this great journey. And it was all of those things. But then it was also the last thing I thought about as well. It's like, you have to, it happens right at the end, and it is both a surgical procedure done in kind of a controlled environment, but it's also an important religious rite, and it is part of the practice of someone being inducted into the traditional part of the Jewish, faith. But you have to commit to that right at the start. You have to know that at some point down the line, this is going to happen. You have to kind of make your peace with that. So I ended up on a series of the most, dubious subreddits in the world, looking at all manner of extraordinary images. Turns out there are different styles that you can get. High and tight versus low and loose. I invite you all to pollute your Google Images history with that.
And then there's
if
probably
you
probably a cut-off. Imagine,
I mean,
imagine you go
that's
for
the
the low
entire
and loose.
point of the surgery, James.
They go for the low and loose, and they're like, it's not enough. It's not enough. Back you go.
Do you know what? Genuinely, there is it's possible. It is possible for a circumcision to be deemed insufficient, and then you need more off. Allegedly, it changed back in the ancient Greek period, and was made slightly more. The nature of what was required was altered slightly.
What's bonkers is as well is now we've got general anaesthetic, good hygiene. This would have been going on before people washed their hands.
Yes, yeah. It's been going on for a long time.
So the one thing that I'm kind of always a bit on the fence, not from a religious standpoint, people go, oh, it's hygiene. And I actually saw Andrew Schultz again has a bit about this where he says uncircumcised isn't a word. You have circumcised and you have dick.
Sure.
So to say uncircumcised is going all the way around and coming back round.
Yeah,
He's like,
yeah.
dick, circumcised. No such thing as uncircumcised.
Sure.
But then I saw a reel on Instagram the other day, and someone was almost taking the piss out of a foreskin. And everyone in it is like, yeah, I don't fancy cheese with my sausage, or all of these things,
Sure.
insinuating that you're just some kind of smegma fest if you had a foreskin.
Sure.
Then
I mean, yeah.
people on each side are like, some women were sticking up and being like, no, I like mine with a hood. I was like, what am I looking at? It is this feral discourse because Darren, one of my best friends, circumcised.
Yep.
One of my business partners is born in America, circumcised.
Yep.
We'll be opposite the table.
Yeah.
Getting defensive over what's better.
Yeah.
It's the crazy thing, but we only have really our own lived experiences with the two. So my first question is, how is it?
Sure. It's a great question. And firstly, after all of my agonizing, panicking and worrying, it's absolutely fine. So it's different, fine, no worse. But there was a healing process. There was all sorts. Secondly, I would say it's such a charged and emotive debate, and I have absolutely nothing but total sympathy for basically like everyone on both sides of it. There are men who style themselves as intactivists who were circumcised as children and don't and are angry about that. And I completely understand. It's something that was done without their consent, and they are dreaming of a better world or a grass that's always green. It's something a different environment that they'll never get to experience, and they try all sorts of colourful ways to kind of replicate that experience and things. And I understand people who prefer it or feel that it's such a deeply held part of their tradition. I was kind of caught in the middle of this. No part of me actively wanted to have it done, but I suppose I'm in the sort of, once again, get your obscure Venn diagrams out for the lads. Someone who had it, had this procedure at a venerable age, with no medical complications prior to that, no need to have it done other than out of choice, and this
How
ceremony.
long was it bad for?
6 weeks.
6 weeks. Wow. And like that first time going for a wee?
Chaos. Absolute unmitigated chaos.
But then like maybe a week after you're like, right, I'm a week down, just take it week by week.
Take it week by week.
Could you work?
So, against the advice of my producer, I took a show to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival with Ivan 2 weeks after I'd had the procedure. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One was I was kind of approaching the end of the conversion process. And at the very end of the conversion process, one enters a body of water called the mikveh, and this is the final ceremony that in which your status is confirmed. And after that point, and only after that point, are you able to, for example, marry the person that you want to marry in a Jewish setting, in an Orthodox setting. We had been desperately hoping that we'd be able to get married before the end of that year. Because it's not impossible to organize a wedding in 2 weeks, so we kind of tentatively tried to pencil somewhere. We couldn't actually like get it until we knew that it was at the end, but we were like just throwing all our hopes at that date. Also, my father was very ill, had dementia, and we were just desperately hoping that we could kind of celebrate whilst he could be kind of a meaningful part of that experience. So that was the day we were hoping for. With that, working backwards from that, you can only enter the mikveh once you are fully healed. Working backwards from that, I needed to have the procedure, have enough time to heal, then get a date in the mikveh, which isn't something you can book on a map. This all comes from the central office of the High Court of Rabbis. So there was and then there was this potential notion of going to Edinburgh and performing. And my thought there was that if I'm just sat lying in bed staring at a wounded part of my body, it's a shortcut to going absolutely mad. What I crave more than anything in the world is a distraction. And there is no greater distraction than performing a comedy show every day at the Edinburgh Festival. You get to care about the most inane nonsense, and it becomes the thing that's at the forefront of your mind. What's going on with that sound cue? Is our mic working? Or what are the Wednesday sales like on Black Wednesday? Everything that was all there to kind of freak out about. I wouldn't have to think too much about the fact that I was very much in a state of recovery. So that was how it ended up happening. There was basically one, it was like the narrowest of windows. There was like one day that this could have happened in order to get it done in enough time to heal just enough to go to the Edinburgh Festival, to perform, to get back in time to be healed enough to go to the mikveh in order to get married. So it was like this kind of Indiana Jones sliding under the door as it closes kind of thing. But I did most of my healing whilst in Edinburgh. I spent a month of August, sleeping in the kind of fetal position with an ice pack, kind of.
Did you have to wear like a cricket box throughout the day?
I wore about 6 pairs of boxers. I had these like kind of sporting boxers, and then I had a kind of, it's called a dance belt, but it's essentially a kind of jockstrap type situation. Basically, no movement was possible once I was kind of hauled into this contraption, and then performed a show. every day. Except, well, not every day, because normally comedians perform every day, but our show was in the afternoon. We took Saturdays off because of Shabbat. And every week in Edinburgh, we'd have a Friday night dinner. And Ivan and I would cook this big dinner, and the word started to spread, and comedians would go, "What? You can just take a day off a week and just not stress about your show." And we're like, "Yeah, turns out you can." And this kind of grew over the course of Edinburgh. So even in this strange environment, as I mentioned, the portability of it, we were able to kind of create this sort of warm communal glow of Shabbat and spend a day a week just kind of decompressing.
You know, when Luke told me about this,
Yeah.
about 2-3 years ago, would have been, man, maybe, I can't remember how long ago it would have been. The first one, I said, why? And I said, the father of the bride, would he check? That's what I said. First thing I said, is the father of the bride going to chill? And I'm pretty sure Luke said, well, he has to do it in case he does. You know, has to.
The
Not to bring the father of the bride into the fray. That was where my mind.
He's a diligent man. He wouldn't check, I don't think. But when you enter the mikveh, you enter the body of water at the end, you are unclothed, and you enter in the presence of the high court of rabbis. They're not staring at you, but they are in the same room. And I suspect, had I claimed earlier that the procedure had already been done, it would have come to light at that point, and it would have all come crashing
there's
down.
only so much you can do with good lighting.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't think the father of the bride would have charged into our bedroom and flung off the duvet and taken a photo.
Prove it.
No!
Okay, so now is this something, now that you're in the orthodoxy of the Judaism church, this is something you're now going to have to pass down. If you have children, you have a son, you're going to have to get it done.
Totally. And so many people are conflicted or against it. There are so many heightened opinions about that. And I have sympathy and time for kind of all of them. Like I've thought, any reservation that anyone's had about it, I've already had. Part of the reason I was able to come to the conclusion that this was something I was able to do for myself, other than the extensive help from various curious gentlemen on various subreddits who still offering to check my after pictures. I'm fine, thank you. Was the knowledge that Eliana and I want to have children, we want to raise a family. If we were to have a son, that's a non-negotiable thing. And it might be something that some people disagree with, but it's unbelievable. The vast majority of Jewish men have had this procedure, and it may be a bit of a round the houses way of thinking, but I don't think I could have gone ahead with that with my hypothetical yet to be born son had it not been something that I had also,
of course,
experienced.
And the other thing here is that you're doing it for religion, you're doing it for a higher purpose within your community. I think sometimes when I look to, say, Americans as, hundreds of millions of men, when I look at Canadians and that amount, sometimes when I look to the non-religious folk out there, I would question, do you need to be doing that?
Sure.
Let's see some data.
Yeah.
Let's correlate the fungal infections. I actually think, again, sorry to be crass or rude.
Not at all.
I think it has something to do with the fact that a penile injury is a lot more likely to occur in a dick. Not uncircumcised, in a dick.
Yeah.
So therefore, by circumcising someone, you can alleviate the chances of them having a banjo tear, stretch, whatever. And it might have something to do with blood-to-blood transfer from that.
Sure.
So I believe that you are less likely to get HIV if you're circumcised.
Sure. I think that's
good news. No, I'm joking.
I think that's the theory in sub-Saharan Africa. It's often done for reasons of disease transmissibility. I'm sure historically traveling through a desert, it might have been beneficial to not trap a load of sand under your foreskin and get some sort of horrifying infection. There are all manner of reasons, pragmatic and traditional and spiritual.
But I don't think anyone's gonna moan to the Orthodox Jews and try and get, your religion you've had for thousands of years, part of your lineage. Could you change it for us? I don't know if that's going to happen, but no, it's one of those things that's always fascinated me is the obsession that people have around it. One thing I would ask, sorry, I'm going all over the place here.
Of course.
The lot of men that have had the procedure done as babies, there was one guy I saw, a gay guy, who was talking about the fact that there's a lot of nerve endings in the foreskin and that his partner now can't make the sensual things to him that he would have if he had it.
Sure.
Is there a desensitization effect that you've noticed?
Well, this is why I went so far down the rabbit hole of the style of circumcision, because as a man in his 30s, who was familiar with how his body worked and been in various relationships, I knew what I could experience. I knew the possibilities of experience that were open to me, and I knew what I enjoyed. And what became incredibly important to me was trying to preserve like as much of that as possible, trying to make sure that whatever the after experience was, it's not too far from the green and pleasant land. That horrible imagery. Why would I use green? From the experiences that I was aware of. And so the the high and tight was the style that I opted for. Because it preserves more of the sensitive inner skin. So I think technically you might be having more skin removed, but because of where the scar line is, the skin that is preserved is more sensitive and thus allows you to experience the world in its manifest glories.
A friend of mine that had it done, won't name him, he actually said he was guilty of potentially finishing a bit too soon before his operation. So it actually bought him a bit of time.
Sure,
So
sure.
he's happy with the cock upgrade. He's absolutely loving it. He says he's a different man in
This
more ways
is
than
it.
one.
If they were marketed as cock upgrades as opposed to circumcisions, I think everyone would get one.
Yeah. So coming up full circle to the book that we got in front of us, Making the Cut. Am I right in thinking, sorry, I haven't read it
Not at
yet.
all.
As we spoke before, you've had this backbone to life of being performative. You've gone through many interesting weaves and turns in your life, all with what it seems and appears like the end product being to give people a laugh, take them away from their typical day, their life, and give them an interjection into an interesting story that you've gone through, something you've built, and to perform and entertain them in some kind of way. Is that the backbone of the book?
I suppose so. Yeah. Storytelling has been a part of everything I've done, whether it's straight comedy or whether it's professional wrestling, whether it's theatre, whether it's writing long features for Esquire magazine or other places. And I'd never written a book before, but this experience was firstly, it was so kind of transformative and life changing. And as I mentioned, I've been creating work based on my own life. Like that's what I've been drawn to. And I felt that the only way that I could adequately explain the textures and the nuances of everything that happened was via a book. It felt like there was no other way to kind of unmediated get all of the to get the story down in paper felt like the most sensible thing to do. And I think that was the right call. It's meant I've been able to explain all of the complexities and the curiosities of it. But yeah, and also the experience was, as well as one of the most meaningful experiences of my life, it was also by turns frustrating, hilarious, excruciating, terrifying, upsetting. Like all human life was contained in this strange period of Eliana and I's relationship. And yeah, I think once we got to the very end of it, it became so much had happened, including a whole series of things right at the end, which you'll need to read the book to find out about. But so much had happened that I knew that I'd need to respond to it in some kind of way. And like I'd written a sitcom fairly recently at that point with Ivan, and it was such a nightmarish process getting that made. And not only that, you kind of start with an idea, and then you sit through 4,000 meetings and it just subtly changes. Your idea is A, and by the end, you don't think you've made that many concessions, but the show is called M. And you're like, well, how do we get all the way that far down the alphabet? And I just felt that if I were trying to, I knew that I had this compulsion, as my life has been governed by, on this occasion, to tell this story in the way that felt the most effective and communicative. And I knew that for example, if I wanted to try and make it into a show, you'd sit with the producer, be like, "Yeah, it's all right, but we'll set it in Leeds. We'll make it about Sikhism because there's a bit of funding in Leeds, which is fine because their job is just making anything." And my compulsion was, I would love to communicate this thing that happened to me.
Don't want them cutting we'll just take the foreskins bit out.
Yeah, no,
Might make a few people uncomfortable.
yeah, we won't do that. Well, hold on a minute. That was, yeah. And it was, yeah. There was a compulsion to tell a story that hopefully people connect to in some way. In many ways, it's the most specific, least relatable story in the world. But I've never been concerned with living a life that's relatable. But at the same time, I think everyone's been in a relationship with challenges. I think everyone's fallen in love and had to work out what they're doing with their life and navigate to something difficult. So I haven't wanted to write a book that only makes sense if you understand the inscrutable complexities and differences between two different strands of an ancient religion. I wanted to write like a love story, I suppose.
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I was saying to everyone before how excited I was to have this discussion. Even just the curiosity about Orthodox Judaism, I find fascinating. Anyone that's listened to this so far, I'm sure they'll be very interested in reading the book. I'll leave all the links in the descriptions so they can get a copy. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, James.